So here is a super quick overview of the basic differences between operant and classical conditioning. So let's start off talking about the type of behavior or type of response. Remember, response and behavior mean the same thing. In classical conditioning, we're talking about respondent behaviors, behaviors that are involuntary, that are automatic, things that an infant can do. So pupil dilation, the startle response, a fear response, blinking. These are examples of involuntary or automatic behaviors. Whereas in operant conditioning, we're always talking about voluntary behaviors. The organism is operating on its environment in a willful way. So raising your hand in class, sending an emoji to your friend, anything you can think of that you do willfully or voluntarily is an operant behavior. In classical conditioning, acquisition occurs when an organism is associating events. A conditioned stimulus announces an unconditioned stimulus, okay? That conditioned stimulus that used to be neutral, like in Pavlov's case, the bell for the dogs, before it was paired with the meat powder, wouldn't evoke any kind of a response. Once the bell became conditioned, or the tone, I should say, became conditioned, the dog now knows when it hears the tone, that predicts the unconditioned stimulus is going to be presented, which is the meat powder. So it's a learned association between the conditioned stimulus, the tone, and the unconditioned stimulus, which is the meat powder. Whereas acquisition with operant conditioning is associating a response with a consequence or a behavior with a consequence. So I do something, let's say I raise my hand in class, I associate that with a consequence. Either I'm praised by the teacher, or maybe the teacher treats me with sarcasm and I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm never going to raise my hand again, in which case my hand raising behavior has been punished. Extinction. The condition response decreases when the conditioned stimulus is repeatedly presented alone. Remember, extinction for classical conditioning, we need to break the association between the conditioned and the unconditioned stimulus, since that's where acquisition occurred. All right, so we want to continually present the tone without the meat powder so that the dog learns to no longer predict the meat powder when it hears the tone. It's going to stop salivating at the sound of the tone, and that's extinction. Whereas with operant conditioning, responding decreases when reinforcement stops. So let's say I have a child who every time I take them out to Target, I've been there, I'm speaking from experience, they throw a tantrum. Well, depending on the function or the reason for their behavior, they might be throwing that tantrum to gain access to attention. Well, if I remove the attention, which is the reinforcement, I would expect their tantrum behavior to stop or to become extinct. Cognitive processes. Subjects develop an expectation that the conditioned stimulus signals the arrival of the unconditioned response. So there is a level of cognition or expectation that's happening, that an organism is learning that this conditioned stimulus, like the presence of the tone, is going to lead to the unconditioned stimulus then being presented, like the meat powder. The cognitive element of operant conditioning is that as an individual, I come to learn that if I exhibit a particular behavior, it is going to be reinforced or punished, and that's going to determine whether or not I exhibit that behavior. And like we've talked about with, we will talk about with latent learning, we're also going to learn that learning can occur even when reinforcement is not present. And finally, biological predisposition. So natural predispositions constrain what stimuli and responses can be easily associated. And probably our best example of this is the Garcia effect. The fact that we are biologically predisposed or biologically prepared to learn taste aversions easier than aversions to sights or sounds. And for operant conditioning, organisms best learn behaviors that are similar to their natural behaviors. For an example of this, we're going to learn about some raccoons who researchers tried to train to take coins and place them into piggy banks. what they found was that they were able to train the raccoons to put one coin in a piggy bank, but whenever they gave them two coins, they would rub them together because their instinct is to clean their food by rubbing it together, and they were treating the coins as they were treating the food. So this is what we're going to call instinctive drift. And that's an example of how biological predispositions can influence whether or not an organism learns a new behavior through operant conditioning.